Okay, everyone, it's Gordy and the NMRAx team here. We're back. Sorry for the little delay, but I think it takes a few minutes to stop the stream and restart it. And also, you've got to understand that we are doing this via a PC that's in Australia from Scotland. So these things take a little while, but it looks like the stream's back up. I think everyone can hear me talking. I hope so. You should soon be able to, and we are there, so I can see us in the stream, and hopefully everyone can hear me talking. So we're a little bit over, but that'll be fine because we have an absolute expert historian into the hobby here. The untold, unheard, not unheard of. You're not unheard of. That's unfair. The silent expert in the back of the room who makes sure that our manufacturers are held to account through that fantastic magazine that is Model Railroad News. We have the editor-in-chief of Model Railroad News, Tony Cook, who is here with us this afternoon in the US, this evening in the UK, and some early hours in the morning in Australia. If you're still with us in Australia, give us a shout out on the feed. But Tony is here. He's going to talk to you about prototype to model, and in specific prototypes, EMD, SD50's, and SD60's. So, Tony, say hello to everyone.
Hey, hello everybody. This is Tony Cook. Hi, Gordy. I know you've had a crazy couple weeks getting all this together, but man, it has really been awesome watching the presentations last night. I think it's really been exciting. You can see from the feedback that everybody's having a lot of fun. So I know there's been a lot of, hey, I'm having trouble connecting or this or that. But as you say, we're bouncing all around the globe with this. And this is our first time through on it. So I think it's pretty exciting. I'm coming to you from the Kansas City area in Missouri, almost dead center in the continental United States. And it's a sunny spring afternoon here. Everyone's out mowing their yards in my neighborhood. So I assume I'm ducking yard work to get to talk trains, but that's not a bad thing to do. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about EMD's 1980s SD50s and 1990s SD60's. And I think these are kind of somewhat forgotten prototypes. And I say forgotten because, as we know, the transition era from steam to diesel was always talked about as being really popular. And that's kind of the World War II 1940s up into the 1960s. So the first generation of diesels. And then we always have a group of guys, out there that are modeling what they see out on the railroads now, which, of course, that's Tier 4s, GEVOs, SD70 Aces. But there's kind of that area in between that's been gaining a lot of popularity because you have a lot of modelers that grew up in the 1980s, 1990s, and that's what they remember seeing. And a lot of times what you saw first when you really got into rail fanning is something that you end up modeling. And this is EMD's kind of their fade out point as far as being what they were, that the SD50-60 follows the Dash 2 era of the 1970s. And we'll get into that in just a second. But speaking of what you grew up with, I'll give you a little bit of background on me in case you aren't familiar with me. I'm a lifelong railroad enthusiast and also model railroad collector. I grew up in Illinois, north of the St. Louis, Missouri area. And these are pictures you're looking at here of me now in that top corner where you see home of Walther's Model Trains. That's 1968, I believe. And my dad worked up in Milwaukee for Walther's. And that's me on my mom's shoulders. And then next there is GM&O F units coming by in my hometown of Jerseyville, Illinois, which, as I say, is about an hour or so north of St. Louis. In the Kansas City area, one of the things I did before I got into magazines, you see below there, it says Marketing Director at Union Station, and that's the model railroad experience that we opened at Union Station, Kansas City in it might have been 2009, actually. That far back, we always did Christmas displays of model trains, and then people would ask all year long, where can we see the model trains? And so we set up, it's an 8,000 square foot area that's available to people to come see, and they've been upgrading it and doing a lot to it. It's closed at the moment because of the coronavirus situation, but check out USKC, their website, unionstation.org, and that's for Kansas City's Union Station. And you can see events, traveling exhibits, there's restaurants, all sorts of things to do. And I worked for 10 years at Union Station after it was renovated in the late 1990s. And in the last 10 years, I've been serving as the editor of Model Railroad News magazine, which this year is celebrating its 25th anniversary. It's a monthly publication from White River Productions, and it covers news of all scale model trains as well as in-depth reviews. I also am the co-editor of HO Collector, which is a quarterly publication, also from White River Productions. I do that with a buddy of mine, Tony Lucio, in Kentucky, that we're both kind of hobby historians and collectors of old trains. And HO Quarterly is a project that we started in 2017 with White River Productions letting us kind of have some fun with a 48-page quarterly magazine. This is our latest issue, the second quarter 2020, and we cover the Revell product line, and the feedback has really been incredible on this one. A lot of things that you collect or you're interested in, at times you wonder, are there other collectors out there with the same interest? And, from eBay and swap meets, you can kind of see things that people go after and what's fun to collect. But Revell was a product line that I always enjoyed, but wondered, what its impact was with people and how much they liked it. And I've been amazed at the feedback from people saying, oh, the Revell line, that was so awesome. And it was one we've been asked about a lot. So this latest issue that just came out in the last few weeks essentially is all Revell, other than, as you see at the bottom cover there, I've got a little section on Burlington Northern as it hit 50 years, which that almost doesn't seem possible, that it was 50 years ago that Burlington Northern started in 1970. But that's HO Collectors, one of my other responsibilities with White River. And then Otto Vondrock, when he took over as Railroad Model CRAFTSMAN's editor, started back up the Collector Consist. And I do it as a quarterly column in Railroad Model Craftsman. And isn't that awesome? I love that. That's a Rock Island O-gauge layout in the St. Louis area. And that's the March issue. That's the most recent one I believe I have a collector consist in. And again, I did something Burlington Northern for its 50th anniversary. I did that great Lionel Jeep 30 of 1975 or 6, I believe, is when it comes out. I'd have to look at the article and remind myself now. But that comes out quarterly, and that's in Railroad Model Craftsman. And now back on to now that I've kind of promoted and talked a little bit there and gave you some background. As I was saying, that bridge between the Dash 2 and the 50 series for EMD, they were on top of their game. General Motors had been the king of diesels basically for a decade. Alco had been gone by 1969-70. General Electric kind of was always an also ran. The 1970s, they certainly were coming back around with their Dash 7 series. But in general, EMD was king of the hill when it came to diesels. And in the late 70s, their test beds for what would be the 50 series were introduced. And they were these awesome GP40X units, the 4-axle predecessor to the GP50. And as always kind of seemed to be on some of EMD's test beds, it got flared radiators, even though the standard production, it would be the GP50 would be what this regular model would be, didn't get flares. And I think that's also duplicated in a couple of the demonstrator SD40's and GP40's from the early 60s also had flares, and then the production models didn't. So it always seems to be a bell or whistle they show, and then the regular units don't follow through. But these 40X's were awesome units. They went out to a number of the major Class 1 railroads. I think 1978 is when they first hit the rails. I remember seeing the UP ones on vacations out west in Nebraska on UP's Overland route, and they were so awesome. They have these special trucks. I think that's HTC. I may be wrong on what I'm saying on those trucks now that I say that. But that and the flared radiators, they were really awesome units. But this is what was setting the basis for what EMD thought would be its next round of things that would be as successful as like their SD40-2, which in this picture, that Northwestern unit behind the UP unit is one of the 40-2s, which is one of UP's biggest, or one of EMD's biggest sellers. So the SD50 in 1981 rolls out. This, if you look close and think about it for a minute, you'll realize what road name that is, even though it's not lettered. That's a Seaboard system unit, and it's actually testing in this picture on the Santa Fe. A lot of railroads looked at them. Again, EMD was king of the hill, so everyone was interested to see what was coming next. And this 50 series, as it was introduced in 1981, 3,500 horsepower, was a 16-cylinder unit, and a lot of railroads took a look at them, but sales didn't match what the SD40-2 and the -2 series in general was. I'm going to talk a lot of HO, but as I get into the people that owned the SD50s, I know I'm going to get in trouble from my associate editor, Shane Mason, if I don't show some in scale. So here's an in scale. This is an Atlas Master, and this is a Conrail, of course. Conrail owned 135 examples of EMD's SD50, and I believe that is the largest single roster that was on any railroad. Next, Seaboard System had 81, and we saw the color picture of the Seaboard, so you can kind of see that. The Seaboard's got around, too. I know the Rio Grande looked at Seaboard units were sent out to work on the Rio Grande to convince them to buy SD50s as well. But here's some Seaboard units, and remember, this is that short-lived after the family lines and before CSX. We had Seaboard System for a few years, and so this is one of the few new power things to carry that scheme. And speaking of CSX, both B&O C&O purchased SD50s. C&O had 43 examples, and this is one of the last, I think this is actually the last new power to come delivered in the chassis system scheme. We've got a review coming up of this in Model Railroad News by Wesley James. He and his boys take a look at models for us from time to time, and they're working on these chassis SD50s from Walther's Mainline, which is a new release that's come out recently for this in HO. Northwestern was a big buyer of them. This is an awesome picture. This is actually on the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range, and you can see I assume that's smoking brakes there as it's coming in from someplace, but an awesome picture there. The Northwestern SD50 roster was 35 units. They also purchased SD60's. As I mentioned, B&O C&O were buyers. B&O had a few less than the C&O as they were still dividing things up. Remember, chassis system power always carried the reporting marks of the home roads or the owning roads, B&O, C&O, and WM for Western Maryland. This is a B&O example a little bit later in its career. If you look close under the ampersand, there's the CSXT has been stamped on that one. The B&O C&Os and the Seaboards, and then as well as the Rio Grande group, because they were bought on the same order, that slot you see to the left of the road number, I think that's called a mailbox slot, and the idea behind that was you could look in, I think, to check there's batteries and equipment in there, so they cut a slot basically for easy access to, check on the equipment inside there, and that's kind of a signature thing that was on the chassis, but did end up on other models as well. One of those awesome places in the world, the east portal of the Moffat Tunnel under the Continental Divide. That's about an hour west of Denver. And speaking of Colorado in that area, I hope everybody enjoyed Michelle Kempema's visit that she gave to the Greeley Museum. I was lucky enough to get to go out there last fall in September with my buddy Lionel Strang from Modeler's Life, that we took our Cadillac out and spent a week out chasing the big boy and then stopped down there in Greeley. And that, what you saw in the video, there's DVDs that they sell. So if you didn't get enough of it, go to the website for her Model Railroad Museum out there. And the DVDs, I think I picked a couple up and they were maybe like $10. And it's an unbelievable HO model railroad, one that you definitely got to put on your list of things to do. Anyway, back to the Rio Grande. This is a great Jim Boyd shot of a set of SD50s exiting the Moffat Tunnel. Rio Grande actually went back wanting more of their SD40 T-2 tunnel motors, but by the time they got around to ordering them in the early 80s, EMD had moved on to the SD50s. And as I mentioned, the Seaboard power was sent out to test on the Rio Grande to try to convince them to buy. I think the original plan, Rio Grande was going to purchase 20 tunnel motors, and these SD50s they've got the radar stuff on the axles for better slippage stuff, which is important, of course, to the Rio Grande for hauling coal trains in the mountains, proved to be beneficial. So they ended up getting 17 SD50s versus the 20 tunnel motors. And they were, again, built on the end of a chassis order, as I recall. So they do come with a mailbox slot on the side, which would be kind of a chassis feature. I'll be reviewing this in a Rio Grande themed issue that's coming up later this year in Model Railroad News. And again, it'll be the Walther's Mainline HO scale model. And that model has in fact, I just got it in the mail today. I picked it up from Spring Creek out in Nebraska that I found an example of it. and we'll be reviewing it. It has a very interesting history, as I kind of mentioned a little bit, on how it, these were added to the end of a chassis order. They were to be tunnel motors. They're some of the last new power for the Rio Grande. They did get 3 GP60's later, but those were wreck replacements. So this is really the last legitimate new power the road bought. And the model review, you'll find some interesting things, because the Walthers model comes without that set of lights in the nose. So you'd say, well, it's not correct. But I do have pictures from White River Productions' Kevin Udaley. He has pictures of them when they were on their way to the Rio Grande. They stopped at Mid-America Rail Car in Kansas City, and those lights got put in there. So they actually did leave EMD as the Walthers model looks, with no lights in the nose. So the guys at Mid-America Rail Car in Kansas City had to file down the noses, and I guess there's giant Details West or Detail Associates lights that you buy and cut into those. So if you'd have driven by there on the right day, you'd have seen all those yellow little cardboard packages from Details West or Associates laying around Kansas City Mid-America Rail Car as they were putting those on. Another odd SD50 as we move on is Canadian National, who had SD50Fs for full body. And if you see, it's kind of has the draper taper cut into the side. Now, these are things that Rapido Trains has been working on in HO and N, I think in SD50's. The N scale is maybe about to come out. This is an HO model that was built by Ajin in Korea and imported by Overland some years back. But this is kind of one of the variants that were built for the SD50. Kansas City Southern had 10 SD50s, and I believe they and Norfolk and Western have some interesting early examples that are SD50S, and that S is for short, that they're on a shorter frame, so they're not the same length as an SD50. And I forget some of the reasoning on that, if it's maybe an SD40-2 frame, but that if you look in Diesel Era, which is another great magazine, we don't actually publish that at White River, but I got to put out a plug for Paul Withers and Diesel Era. The Diesel Era is one you really ought to take if you're any kind of a diesel fan, because it comes out every other month and is always full of great information on diesels. And again, I think that's where I read the stuff on some of these SD50S units being made, and KCS had some of those. This one always throws me when I see them at shows, because I always get excited going, wow, a Mopac SD50, and I'm picturing Jinx Blue with a big screaming eagle, and then I open it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's painted Union Pacific. That these came after the Union Pacific merger, but they were lettered Missouri Pacific down the side. You can kind of see it on the long hood, that these were the last of the Mopac power, and this is 4 SD50s on a coal train. And again, they are technically Mopac, but at a glance, you'd think they were, UP roster members. Again, back to the shorties, Norfolk and Western got some of the very early SD50s, I think in 1981, but then Norfolk Southern goes back and purchases 20. So there are 20 regular length SD50s and also regular cab. By this time, high hoods were out of favor with both Norfolk and Western and Southern. So sadly, there's no high hood SD50s, although that would be a fun kit bash to put together. And this is actually, see the Southern reporting marks under it. So this is one of the regular body SD50s that was on the NS roster. We'll take a little break here. I wanted to let everybody know about something that we were doing at Model Railroad News. Weathering My Car Weathering Contest was a project that my associate editor, Shane Mason, came up with while so many of us have been at home with something to do. And you see the 6 cars here, and they did voting on this in the last week. And what they did was each guy took a car and sent it to somebody else. So you took a car from your collection and you shared it with another modeler, and you asked them to weather it for you. So you're weathering my car, and Shane dubbed this first one the Quarantine Classic. And I believe our winner was Clem Harris of Arizona, I believe, or New Mexico, maybe New Mexico. And he's there in the bottom center, the Katy Hopper, and he got a $100 gift certificate from Midwest Model Railroad in Independence. And then I forget our others, the order of the others, but I think Adam Pinales, which is the BNSF car in the bottom right, might have been second place. And I sponsored the event after Shane came up with the idea. So I picked up the gift certificates. The main one was Midwest Model Railroad, $100. And then I did $50 gift certificates from trainlife.com, Lombard Hobbies in the Chicago area, and the Zuckers out in Spring Creek Model Trains, which of course, every time I bought a gift certificate, I also ended up thinking, well, since I'm getting an order anyway, I'll get this and this and this. As I say, I got that Rio Grande SD50 from Spring Creek, and I picked up the True Line Trains New Mexico Roadrunner MP36 from Spring Creek because I didn't have one of those in my collection. And I saw that recently thinking, oh, I think I remember seeing one there, and they still had it. So these gift certificates cost me a fortune when I added in all the stuff I decided I needed to buy while I was doing it. But we're going to do another one of these weathering contests. We'll probably be doing it in the fall, and you'll see more pictures and more information. We're going to have a 2-page spread in the July edition of Model Railroad News, which will be out in early June. And Shane Mason will detail this Weathering My Car. So look for that. Search it on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and search Weather My Car Weathering Contest, and you can find out more. It is open to about anybody that wants to, I believe. And as I say, we'll be doing it again. So fun thing and a fun way to win some stuff. On to the SD60's. This was the successor to the SD50. It came out in 1984, so about 4 years after the 50s. It's 3,800 horsepower, so 300 more horses than they put in the SD50. And this, to me, this was the face of the SD60's. That anybody that remembers rail fanning at that time, Burlington Northern had 100 of these on kind of a long-term lease agreement they were the Oakway units, as I remember them being called. And boy, were they pretty. Aren't those awesome? In that blue and white scheme with silver trucks. The Oakway units served the BN for a number of years and then sold and went to other places. But at first, they weren't actual BN units, so they always stayed in this kind of demonstrator paint. But you saw them, all over the BN. This is a great Jim Boyd shot. That's on the joint line between Denver and Pueblo. That's in Larkspur, which I think is north of Colorado Springs and south of Denver. There's 3 of the SD60's when they were fairly new. Canadian National had a large roster of SD60's, again, regular Spartan cabs. And that's another thing by this point, the regular Spartan cab that came in the early 1960s, the GP 3035s were kind of the first look of this style to have this on an EMD unit. The 60s were towards the end of this. There are some 70s with regular cabs, but I think the 60 was kind of the last round of it being this is the standard way you'd expect to get them. CN had 90 SD60s. Union Pacific had 85, and I had to add in, I added in an N-scale unit so I wouldn't leave out N-scale friends. And this, I tell you, this is a rabbit hole that whenever I see these at shows, I look for a few minutes and then it's like, okay, keep moving because I'm going to end up buying Legos. But isn't this cool? This is a Lego SD60. I can't identify the face here exactly, and those trucks look a little suspect to me. But isn't that awesome? I'm sure you guys see these at shows, and it's a really fun thing. This is an internet sourced picture that I found in looking for a regular cab UP SD60. And again, UP had 85 of these on its roster. Two Line had 58 SD60s. Chicago Northwestern, as I mentioned, also came back after buying SD50s. They buy SD60s. And it's that broom on the nose, like a signature Northwestern feature. I know I've seen brooms as details on a lot of units over the years, but somehow that broom sticking to the nose of a unit to me is such a Chicago Northwestern thing. We've got reviews coming up from Andy Dorsch, who has a Chicago Northwestern YouTube channel and is a big Northwestern modeler. He's doing reviews of the HO scaletrains.com SD40-2s. And I remember that was one of the things when I opened those up to do photography on them. It's like, oh, wow, cool. They added the little broom to the nose. So if you're a Northwestern modeler, somehow you got to have one of those. They must have been the neat road that had to have them. Kansas City Southern came back for SD60s as well. As you see, this is the ones I showed of the short 50s were the white scheme. This is their gray scheme. Still very plain when you consider the awesome bell scheme that KCS has today. I think it's one of the best schemes out there for a modern Class 1. This is the gray with yellow stripes on the nose and the red billboard KCS on the side. They had 46 examples of the SD60. I mentioned Burlington Northern and the Oakways. They did legitimately have a trio of SD60's. I think these were the demonstrators that EMD built, and BN did buy them, and then they went into that lease agreement on the 100 Oakway units. And this is the kind of tiger striped face. If you remember at that time, BN was tinkering a lot with its look. I kind of call that the Lionel or Tyco, the giant BN in Burlington Northern on the side. Looks a little toyish. And they did some white face, and they had this tiger face for a while, but this was a scheme that was on the 3 SD60's that were actual roster members in the 8300 number series on the BN. This is an older Athearn ready-to-roll release. This was an all-new tooling piece that Athearn did. Some of the Athearn models in the ready-to-roll line come from rail power products, as well as other sources, but this was one they tooled up, and I always felt like it was kind of a in-between ready-to-roll and Genesis, because it's such an awesome unit with so many details on it that it's really a step above a lot of their ready-to-roll pieces. And this 50, or this 60 rather, the 50 and 60s that they did are neat models to go out and find, and they've got more coming. I'll go over some of the coming items in this series at the end of the presentation. Secondhand for the Conrail units, most of them went over to the CSX. Again, here's an Athearn example that they've done that in. That's the not the most modern of the CSX. It doesn't have the How Tomorrow Moves logo, but there again is a look at a repainted Conrail that moved over to CSX. Another secondhand, and here as I was talking about KCS, this Panama Canal Railway is of course one of the subsidiaries of CSX that works down in Central America on the Panama Canal, and it adopted the same Bell heritage livery. And they have, I think, 3 at least SD60's down there on Panama Canal, and this is an Athearn example of those. And isn't that a sharp scheme with the silver roof? And it's interesting that if you look at the design across the nose and such, how well it works on a Spartan cab, because you think of all of the contemporary like BNSF and other paint schemes, and all of them essentially are designed for that wide nose that is the de facto standard today. But look how great on a regular nose that KCS scheme looks. I see a lot of the little 4-axle power over where my folks live in Illinois. They're on the old GM&O, and some of the locals will have like old rebuilt Jeep 40s and Jeep 38s in this scheme, and I think it's really, really attractive. We'll take another little break here. You've been seeing a lot of slides during this presentation. These are from the collection of the president of White River Productions, Kevin U. Daly. And Kevin is an avid collector of slides and has been for years. And one of the things that I do is I scan and archive the slides that Kevin accumulates, and they're used in all of our publications. You see a number of our titles across the bottom of the ad here, and Kevin is always on the lookout for slide collections. You can go to our website to get information, or you can call that toll-free number. And if you've got a slide collection, I mean, the worst thing that can happen is spending all that time and effort rail fanning, documenting, taking pictures, and then either not have a use for your slides anymore, or just to have them go away. We have that a lot where people are like, oh, I don't have a slide projector anymore. I don't shoot slides. I just got a collection recently from a person. Same thing. I've had a number of slides in a box for years. I'll never use them, but I hate to just throw them out. And it's like, for goodness sakes, don't throw them out, because there's always that chance you've got a cool picture of something that somebody's been looking for. So again, contact us at White River if you have slides, and we certainly are always interested in talking to somebody about what they might have, again, to kind of document and just to preserve this, because it's our railroad history stuff, and so much was shot on slides now that everyone does digital, to where again, we don't want to lose that as we move forward. Going on with our SD60's, we were talking wide noses a minute ago, and I was mentioning the KCS paint schemes. The 60s is where a lot of the wide nose EMDs came in. There weren't any wide nose EMD 50s basically, but 60s started it. And here is the 60F. Canadian National bought 90 of these, and isn't that an awesome shot? with the CN unit there. That's obviously on the Santa Fe, as you can see from the bridge, and no less than 4 of, I believe those are Amtrak, at least the first 2 are Amtrak SDP40Fs that got rebuilt. And then I think the last 2 are maybe old F45s. And then you see the business car there ahead of what is obviously a hot intermodal train with UPS trailers. So I'm wondering if maybe Santa Fe was giving a look at these SD60s at the time and evaluating them. Conrail had another variant, and this was an odd unit that Athearn made it basically as Conrail only bought them. There were 80 SD60's. They did get split up later between Norfolk Southern and CSX when Conrail broke up in 99, but you can find an HO scale Genesis model of this, and there's one right there in the Conrail quality paint scheme of a 60i. We're going to move on to the SD60Ms. They were introduced in 1990, and how about that for a cool shot? That basically looks like what my train table usually looks like. I see an AHM BL2. There's an old Athearn Blue Box Santa Fe FP45. There's a Bachmann Spectrum Reading Jeep 30. I mean, this was an EMD open house, I believe, in the fall of 1989. And that Northwestern Jeep back there in the corner left, I think that's the first Jeep 7, if I'm correct, if I know my Northwestern stuff. I'm sure if I don't, someone will let me know. But new at the time would have been this in the foreground. Union Pacific 6200 is a Triclops SD60M. It had the North American safety or wide cab, and it has a 3-window face on the cab, and that's the early production of the SD60's. Here's what the two look like. On the left, that's an early 3-window SD60M, and then later production, after about 1991 or 2 and on into the 90s, it went to this 2-window, and if you notice, the nose is a bit different too. See, the nose on the 3-window is kind of flatter and wider, and it's kind of a more narrow and pointed nose on the 2-window version of the 60M. These are both available in HO scale. Athearn has announced this 3-window SD60M is a brand new Genesis model, and I'll show you a pre-production example of it in a moment. The big roster on those was Burlington Northern, had 100 of those, and again, here's kind of one of their modified late-era paint schemes with the white cab face and the white vertical stripes on the side and the very large BN on its nose. How about that for a beautiful shot? This is a Dick Kelb shot from the Kevin U. Daly collection. This is down in Texas on a coal train. I shared this with the folks at Athearn, and you may have seen it already. This was put out on their Facebook page as part of the announcement for this model. But how sharp is that? 4 brand new SD60M 3-window versions running elephant style in Texas on a coal train. UP had 281 examples of this unit. Here's that promised look at the pre-production Triclops. This is coming out from Athearn next year as a Genesis model. This early version, it's always fun to get to see these because we get a look at what the details all are. Like you can see it's brass on like the speed recorder on the trucks. The cab shade, the horn is brass. You can see the other pieces that are styrene. But this is the early 60Ms, and you can go to athearn.com and see the information on those. Those will be coming out, and naturally there'll be DCC and sound, as well as 21-pin socket-ready standard DC models, and that's in HO from Athearn Genesis. I mentioned the later production SD60's. Walthers has just brought this out, or bringing this out, as a mainline model. There's been a number of mainline releases from Walthers recently. The SD50's, as I mentioned, we're going to be reviewing the chassis system and the Rio Grande SD50, and I think I've got the Speed Letter Southern Pacific repaint of a Rio Grande to include with the Rio Grande review from Walthers, and these are mainline releases. This is Walthers SD60M mainline release. These are built to they're economically priced and a little bit lower on the details. You can see there's no lift rings, there's no grab irons on the nose. The pilots don't have coupler cut levers and hoses, but these have been tremendous sellers. They're great looking units. As I say, I got the chassis and sent it off to our Wesley James to review for Model Railroad News. And I had the Southern Pacific repaint and thought, boy, this is pretty cool. And I picked up the Rio Grande to go with it. They're excellent runners. They're good priced, and they do have detail kits that you can purchase and add some of those things on. So if you have that hankering to do a little bit more than open the box and set it on the rails, these give you a great starting point, and they're at a good price. And again, this is the 2-window later version of the SD60. We jump ahead here towards the end of this presentation and go through, everybody knows the 90 ACEs that are around now, all the heritage units for Norfolk Southern, like the George Bush and other units on the Union Pacific. But that in between after the 50-60s, in the early 90s, EMD continued with SD60's. This is a 70 Mac from Burlington Northern Santa Fe's early days. And this has been announced. I don't know if I have a picture of it handy here, but this was just announced by Athearn this week as a coming Genesis piece in that wonderfully odd war bonnet-y mix of the Santa Fe paint scheme design with the late era Burlington Northern kind of executive green and cream scheme. But 1992 is the first of the SD60's. The Mac came along a little bit later. This is Athearn's Genesis Mac. Then the SD80, Cato also makes this, and this is a new model coming from Athearn, also for the Genesis line in HO scale. It was introduced in 1995. And then the 90 Mac was the odd convertible piece where they were shooting for a 6,000 horsepower unit. General Electric did the same with their AC6000s. And the 90 Mac, I think sometimes you hear it referred to as a 4390, because I believe it comes out as a 4,300 horsepower unit. The idea being they would exchange the prime mover when it was ready, which it wasn't ready when they were rolling them out in 95, that it could turn into a 6,000 horsepower. And several roads bought them, but they never really caught on. And for the most part, they got turned away quickly. Like UP had them, but they aren't on UP's roster any longer. Athearn brought this out just recently. This is a 90 Mac-H Phase 2. This is in an EMD scheme. Harry K. Wong in Railroad Model Craftsman reviewed the Union Pacific just recently. And then coming up in Model Railroad News, we're going to have this awesome Australian model. Tony Lucio in Kentucky, one of our contributing editors at Model Railroad News. He's reviewing this model, and this is a picture of the prototype 901. That's the Athearn model we'll be reviewing. I believe I'm going to have that in July's edition of Model Railroad News. And it's a really awesome model. These are pictures from 2018 and a trip that our White River president, Kevin Udaley, made down under to Australia and got to see these in action. But again, as I say, they didn't fare well with roads in North America, and so they ended up other places. And this FMG is an ore road in Western Australia, up on the northern tip of the western part of Australia, that hauls ore, and this is one of theirs. We'll have this coming up in Model Railroad News this summer. We'll turn back around here real quick to the 4-axle units. I basically focused on the SDs, but there were 4 axles, and we started that off with those testbed GP40Xs. This is the rail power shell that was available as a Craftsman level kit it was one of the last shells done by Rail Power. Horizon Hobby purchased those assets and then turned a number of them into ready-to-run models. This is an Athearn 60th anniversary edition, and it's the 40X, which I said is one of the better jobs they did of upgrading the rail power shells. It's truly a neat unit. But there's that 40X in HO. Athearn does a all-new tooling GP50. This was announced or brought out some years back. And then they just announced Friday, this would be the Blue Box GP60 of the 1990s, is going to be an Athearn Roundhouse release, and they're going to do Jeep 59 Jeep 60s. And if you remember the demonstrators on those, they had all the rounded corners to the cab. Now, of course, this is Athearn Roundhouse, so they won't be road specific. They won't have all those details. And as I recall, these had the light package on the nose for the Southern Pacific and such. So these won't have that. These are more basic, just runner models. But that paint scheme is so awesome. I know I'm going to definitely have to have one of those. That's kind of my presentation. I'm going to go through a couple of things here to let you know what we've got going on with the magazines and give you a couple of references, and then we'll take time for a few questions. June's Model Railroad News went off to our printer in the last week, and there's its cover. Rapido Trains B36-7 is the cover model. And again, another one of these 1980s prototypes. that now is really coming into favor. Scale Trains did the C39-8 recently, which I never thought we'd see as a high-end, mass-produced model. And then Rapido added the B36-7. So the 80s, 90s modeler suddenly has a lot of models available that they didn't in just, a few years ago. We've also got reviews of the new Oxford Diecast HO scale late 60s Dodge Charger and Daytona. That's the orange Dodge you see up in the corner. And then I'm reviewing that's Bluford Shop's International Bay Window Caboose in Union Pacific. That's also in the June edition of Model Railroad News. That's a new in-scale model. Also coming in June, I do these prototype profiles. If you don't pick up Model Railroad News, we do this on a regular basis where we dig into the prototype and share pictures. This is Montreal Locomotive Works M420, which is another Rapido project, and they're doing the CN models in the first round, but I've got a 4-page prototype profile where, as you see, there's the B unit from BC Rail, the different variants of that 420. I cover all that information. So that's one of those things you get by going through the magazine, that you get that news that you may have seen or heard elsewhere, but I kind of go behind a little bit and kind of flesh out the prototype and give you some information that once you see, oh yeah, I heard that was announced, but I had a question about this, or I wondered, are they doing the early ones or the late ones, or what's different about this? That's one of those things that we deliver each month in Model Railroad News. Later this year in HO Collector, by request, I had Bill, I think it's Mosteller is his name, of Great Decals. Go to greatdecals.com. He does a lot of decal sets. He's a big Virginian fan, and he asked me a couple of times about how many different Virginian C430s paint schemes did Tyco do. And of course, if you know the Virginian, you also know they never had an Alco Century on their roster. Their diesels were Fairbanks Morse products. But Tyco brings these out beginning in 79, and I'll be going through the various C430s, and we'll also be doing the Virginian unloading hopper car set, and that'll be the third or fourth quarter HO Collector later on this year. One of the fun things I think about an event like this one, or conventions or shows, tell me something I don't know. What did I find out? What is new that, you can surprise me with? I'm very close to sending off for proofing the Penline story. This is going to be a soft cover book that we'll be announcing soon from White River Productions. I'm doing it in collaboration with one of the 3 founders of Penline. His son was researching his father's company, basically because he wanted to know more about that company his dad once had in Pennsylvania that built model trains. And the Penline story will be about a 115-page book. It'll be similar to the annuals that White River does. I don't have a lot more specifics on it, but that's kind of the surprise I wanted to share with some of the HO people, that our Penline history book is due to be announced sometime later this year. And it's an exciting project. For as much as a hobby historian as I am, when it's Gary Stauffer that came to me with the book idea and started talking about it, I was excited because Penline was one that I never really collected a lot and didn't know a lot about. And so it was an exciting thing for me of, oh yeah, I don't know a lot either. This will be fun to discover. So I know you're going to enjoy it. They had that Reading Crusader kit was their first in the mid-50s, and they went on into plastic later on. Their F unit served as Varney and Lifelike's F unit in later days. So a lot of this tooling you're going to recognize moved on to other companies. But the Penline story will be around, our announcement for that later this year. And I hope we have it out maybe by the end of this year, Christmas time, or if not sooner. And it'll be a fun book. This is the first of kind of the HO Collector softcover book projects that are in the works. And while I'm on the subject of White River Productions, our latest magazine acquisition, the Dailies now have Rail Pace News Magazine. You see it there on the left. Before that, O Scale Trains Magazine was added to the fold. The Jewel of the Wasatch book there is the latest, the third in the series from Chuck Conway, laid out by Dale Sanders, and is a fantastic kind of coffee table style book on the Rio Grande. You can find a review of that in a recent Model Railroad News by my friend Adam Pinellas did a review of it, and he lives out in that area and has always been a big Rio Grande fan. And so the book was just a fantastic, group of memories. There's a lot of other books from White River. Southland's a great one on Southern California. as it says there, in the golden age of Kodachrome. So lots of wonderful pictures there. And some of our other titles, Passenger Train Journal is a quarterly publication done by, everybody knows, Mike Schaefer. And then Rail, Fan, and Railroad is Steve Barry and Otto Vondruk do that, the monthly magazine. And then Bob Brown is still putting out the Narrow Gauge Gazette in Shortline, and that's also now part of the White River family. So shop.whiteriverproductions.com will get you all that information. Now, this is not White River, but I know I talked to you about the Lego thing, and I can tell that Gordy is going to come back and start asking me, okay, I got to get into Legos. Tony, how can I learn more? Here is a rabbit hole to consider venturing down. Brick Model Railroader. It's brickmodelrailroader.com, and that magazine, Rail Bricks, you can download and page through. I know a lot of people are at home now, and they've been through their complete DVD library of Green Acres now 3 times. They don't have anything else to do, and they're saying, I need something different to excite me. So there you go, Brick Model Railroader, and get into Legos. I hope I don't look at that too closely, because I know I'm going to end up buying some Lego sets, and that's just one more thing that I'll have to put together shelves for. That's my presentation, and I appreciate everything that Gordy and the other folks that have volunteered and put together, time on for this. This has been just an amazing thing to see happen. Gordy talked about this. We talked about this back at the, I think at the Kansas City National Show. I can remember talking a little bit with Gordy about it and thought, wow, that's a great idea. I'd like to have more of this kind of virtual or online stuff. And then a month or two ago, I was talking with Gordy one morning about this coming together. And it's wonderful to see that this has actually happened. And I appreciate getting to be a part of it. I think it's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot of stuff already in the presentations. I'm eager to see some more, and I'll join in this evening for kind of the wrap-up party. But I hope you had some fun there. There's a nice Saturday afternoon of kind of a slideshow and talking model trains, which is something I'm sure a lot of us would all like to get together and do. So there's my version of it.
Thanks, Tony. So I got some questions that came in for you.
Okay.
Despite all your advertising there, you can't avoid the questions. Seth is ready to come in, so people that are sick of my elevator music or seeing Lionel Strang or other things, you might not have to see it this time. We may go straight to Seth, but for now, I got some questions for you from the peanut gallery here. So, Aaron asks, Tony, what is the one unit you would like to see mass-produced in plastic?
I would really like to see something that's never been done. If I had to pick a never been done, I guess I will kind of smirk and say the Ingalls 4S, that Ingalls shipbuilders unit that was built for the GM&O. I have a brass version of it, but it would be fun to see it done, but no one else would buy it. A serious thing that doesn't exist in a good model is the Century 415. And Lee English at Bowser has talked about it. As you know, that Mahano from Yugoslavia, one from the late 60s, it's been around a few times, is the closest thing we have outside of brass. So a serious 415, and everybody's a bit of an alcoholic, as they say. So yeah, I think it would have sales. So I would say a 415.
Okay, that's cool. Ralph says, when are you going to start doing your weekly product news reports on the Modelers Life podcast again?
I need to do that. Lionel and I did a podcast of Modelers Life one where we talked about new products. I think it goes better if he and I talk, that every time I start to record it, I keep stopping and trying, or my dog starts barking, or, the phone rings. It takes me forever to record the 10 minutes. And I think a back and forth to talk with somebody. Shane Mason and I have talked about doing it that way. And Lionel and I did at least one. We talked about the new Rapido, the Roar Turbo Train project. So we may see more of those. I just, sadly, even though I work from home and this is all I do, that my office is one room away from the bedroom and one room away from the kitchen, that I basically here all day on doing train stuff, there's still not enough hours in the day. But yes, I would like to do more.
Absolutely. I know that feeling recently. Okay. Yeah. I thought lockdown I'd have more time, and no,
Yeah.
just no. Not doing crazy things like this. So I have 3 more questions for you while Seth just gets set up there. What do you think will be the biggest change in our hobby this year?
This year,
Hmm.
I think it's a good thing that I think, we talk so much about what's happening with supplies and other things that there won't be a toilet paper pandemic in model railroading, that trains are coming over from China. I know as of early March, stuff was getting back into production. So anybody worried about, well, what are we going to see ahead? I think Rapido Trains just showed their flexi flow hoppers being put together. They've showed those in scale Draper tapers. There's plenty of product on the way. And I think one of the things that's changed that's of interest, I've talked to, when I was buying those gift certificates, I talked to a number of hobby shops. I had Dave Zucker up at Spring Creek tell me this. I had Stephen Atwell at Midwest Model Railroad in Independence, Missouri tell me this. So many people are buying model train stuff, and not just locomotives, rolling stock, books. They're buying track, they're buying road bed, they're buying kits. It seems like a lot of people have been hit with this. I never have time to work on my railroad. And now suddenly it's stay at home order. I have time to work on my railroad. And so, yeah, I think that there seems to be a big rush. And it's great to see. I've seen that tons of emails, questions about who makes this. I had somebody asking me for instructions because they had a kit they'd had for years and lost the instructions and said, I'm finally going to build this and I don't have the instructions. So I found my sample of it, scanned the instructions for him, and sent it to him. So it was the static HO scale monogram big boys. He said, all I have is like the German or Spanish version of the instructions. Do you have it in English? And so I scanned and put those together. So I see more people that are like rediscovering their hobby, which is such a great thing.
Okay, final question. We've only got kind of like a minute and 30 seconds before we speak. Mr. Speed is going to slap me round the head. Is the hobby growing?
Yes, it is. It really is. And again, this, as you saw, I think this even more, what we're doing here in this virtual situation, subscription numbers on like Model Railroad News have been climbing. I was told that recently with the situation, the stay at homes, that a lot of people that can't get to their hobby shop or their hobby shop's closed, there's more interest in these things. And the internet is just, Lionel Strang likes to say this, and I know you've heard him say it, that this combination of what we have available now with Facebook, these visual things we can do here, sharing things. Model railroading always was kind of that stay at home order. In fact, I've had people that ask me that where they say, so how has this been for you? I don't know. I worked at home for the last 10 years. It's kind of the same thing. I'm always at home in my shorts and a t-shirt working. So I think that this ability for model railroaders, that we always are kind of these introvert, on our own type people, that this gives us that connection, Facebook and these kind of virtual things. So it just sets the stage for, this to really explode and get to share ideas. And you see it a lot like this, what we've done here in the last day or so is an example of it. And Gordy, again, I know I've said this a bunch of times, but thank you. This is tremendous. I definitely will buy you a pint the next time I see you.
Excellent. I'll hold you to it.
I know you will.
Okay, well, thank you, Tony. That's been fantastic. We will let you go, and we're going to bring Seth in to do his layout tour. But thank you, Tony. We will touch base with you again in a few hours' time to wrap everything up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gordy.